Like this video and subscribe to the channel now if you want to see justice served. What happens when a man who has it all decides he wants more? The air in courtroom 4B of the San Francisco Superior Court was thick with the scent of old paper and the unspoken animosity of a high-stakes divorce. In the center of it all sat Mark Thompson, a titan of the Silicon Valley tech scene and the founder of the multi-billion-dollar company Quantum Leap. He was a man accustomed to winning, and his predator's smile proved it. Beside him wasn't his wife of 15 years, the mother of his 2 children, but his stunning young lover, Brittany Hayes. Mark thought he had the perfect plan to leave his wife Eleanor, with nothing but her dignity stripped away. He was about to publicly accuse her of infidelity and demand paternity tests for their children, Leo and Sophia. But in the cold, silent halls of justice, a secret was waiting, a secret sealed in an envelope on the judge's desk. Mark expected a victory walk, but he was stepping into a perfectly laid trap, and the truth, encoded in DNA, was about to detonate his entire world. Across the aisle sat Eleanor Thompson. If Mark and Brittany were a raging fire, Eleanor was a frozen lake. She sat with a posture so straight she seemed carved from ice. Her simple navy blue dress radiated a quiet dignity, not surrender. There were no tears, just a placid mask of neutrality. Her gaze wasn't on her husband or his mistress, but on the formidable woman on the bench, Judge Evelyn Valencia. To the outside world, this was a tragic but familiar tale. The brilliant, middle-aged billionaire discarding his loyal wife for a younger model. The media had already painted the picture. Eleanor, the former art historian who had given up a promising career to raise a family, was now being cast aside. It was a cliché, and Mark was counting on that. But Eleanor knew something no one else in that room did. She knew this wasn't a cliché. This was a horror movie, and she was the final girl. Her mind flashed back a year to the last time she had felt truly safe. It was the annual Innovators Gala. She remembered the cool silk of her dress, the weight of the diamond necklace Mark had gifted her. In his acceptance speech, he had called her his North Star. He'd said, "None of this would be possible without the most intelligent, beautiful, and patient woman in the world, my wife, Eleanor." The room had erupted in applause. She had believed him then, but looking back, she realized it had been a performance. Mark was the CEO of his own life, and everyone else was just an employee, playing a role. The first crack in the facade had appeared 3 months later. It was a subtle scent on his shirt when he came home late. A perfume she didn't recognize. When she asked, he laughed it off. A week later, a charge appeared on their joint credit card statement for expensive lingerie. "A gift for my sister's birthday," he said casually. But his sister's birthday was 6 months away. The small crack branched into undeniable fissures. Nights out became more frequent. Business trips stretched without notice. He became distant, his phone guarded like a state secret. The easy intimacy they had shared for 15 years evaporated, replaced by a cold, formal politeness. He was a ghost in their sprawling home in Atherton. Eleanor wasn't naive. She had a master's degree in art history, specializing in detecting forgeries. She knew how to look for inconsistencies, the brushstroke that didn't belong, the pigment that was anachronistic. And her husband's life had become a poorly executed forgery. The pain was a physical, constant ache in her chest. Then, on a rainy Tuesday, the pain crystallized into an icy clarity. An email notification flashed on the family iPad, which still had Mark's session logged in. The subject line was Project Nightingale, Asset Reallocation. The sender was Mark's notoriously ruthless corporate lawyer, Marco Torres. Curiosity battled with her sense of privacy, and she clicked. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't a corporate project. It was a meticulously crafted divorce strategy. It described the creation of shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, the transfer of marital assets to untraceable accounts, and a strategy to devalue her paper stock options. Project Nightingale was a plan to leave his wife with the bare minimum the law would allow, protecting the vast majority of his $500 million fortune. But it was the last paragraph that made her gasp. Phase 4. Character leverage. To secure a favorable custody arrangement and counter any spousal support claims based on lifestyle, we will challenge the paternity of the children. This will immediately put EB on the defensive, portray her as untrustworthy and morally compromised, and shift the narrative in our favor. We will leak this to our media contacts at the appropriate time. They were going to say Leo and Sophia weren't his, her children, her babies. The man she had loved was planning to disown them in a court of law as a financial strategy. In that moment, something inside Eleanor snapped. The heartbroken wife died, and a warrior was born. He had mistaken her kindness for weakness, her devotion for stupidity. He was about to find out how wrong he was. She took a screenshot of the email, sent it to her own phone, and then deleted the original. He would never know she had seen it. What part of Eleanor's strategy so far impressed you the most? Let us know in the comments below. The very next day, Eleanor Thompson made 2 phone calls. The first was to an old college friend, a brilliant family law attorney named David Cho. He was a strategist who won his cases in the discovery phase, not in the headlines. They met in a discreet cafe far from the prying eyes of the tech elite. She told him everything. The suspicions, the email, and the cold-blooded plan. "This isn't just a divorce, Eleanor," he whispered, his eyes dark with a mix of disbelief and fury. "This is scorched earth. He's planning to annihilate you psychologically and use your children as ammunition. This document, this is malicious prosecution waiting to happen." "I know," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "He thinks I'll fall apart. He expects tears and hysteria. He doesn't expect a fight." "So what do you want to do?" David asked, leaning forward. "He wants to challenge paternity," Eleanor said, a chill in her tone. "He wants to stand in court and accuse me of being an unfaithful wife and a liar. He wants to demand a DNA test, so we're going to give it to him. But we're going to have the results before he even asks the question." David's eyebrows shot up. A private DNA test? Without a court order? "Eleanor, the chain of custody would be hard to establish. He could claim we tampered with the samples." "We won't use it as evidence, David," she explained. "We'll use it as knowledge. Knowledge is power. We'll know the answer. We'll let him make his vile accusation in open court. We'll let him humiliate me. We'll let the judge order the official test. And when the results come back, his own motion will be the instrument of his destruction. He won't just be proven wrong. He'll be exposed as a malicious liar and a fraud in front of the entire world. His character, the very thing he's trying to attack, will be irrevocably destroyed by his own hand." A slow smile spread across David Cho's face. "Eleanor Thompson, you're more ruthless than he is." "He taught me," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "He just doesn't know what a good student I am." The second phone call was to a discreet private investigation firm. The ex-cop she hired, Frank Perez, was a no-nonsense man in his 50s. She didn't need him to prove the affair. Mark's own clumsiness had already done that. She needed him for 2 things: to document the extent of the infidelity for the court, and to get the crucial DNA sample. "I need a sample of my husband's DNA," she told him in his cramped, anonymous office. "A hair, a used coffee cup, anything. But it has to be obtained cleanly, and he can never know." While Frank went to work, Eleanor began her own silent campaign. She played the part of the oblivious, slightly sad wife to perfection. She smiled politely at Mark during the rare moments they were together, a serene mask hiding the furious fire underneath. He mistook her calm for resignation, her stillness for defeat. His arrogance was her greatest ally. Frank delivered the goods 2 weeks later. He provided Eleanor with a folder containing dozens of high-resolution photos. Mark and Brittany kissing poolside at a conference, holding hands at dinner, entering their hotel room together. It was clinical, irrefutable proof. But the most important item he handed her was a small evidence bag. Inside was a single, disposable Starbucks coffee cup. He tossed it in a public garbage can on his way into the office this morning, Frank said. It's all yours. The next step was the most painful. She had to get samples from her own children. She waited until they were asleep, and with a small, sterile pair of scissors, she cut a tiny, imperceptible lock of hair from the back of their necks. She sealed them in separate bags. She then used a sterile cheek swab on herself. She packaged the 3 samples, the coffee cup, the 2 locks of hair, and her own cheek swab, and sent them via medical courier to a reputable DNA lab in another state. Do you think Eleanor was right to get the children's DNA samples without their knowledge to protect them? Let me know in the comments. While she waited for the results, Mark made his move. He sat her down in their cavernous living room and announced it was time to go their separate ways. His voice was devoid of emotion. I've already spoken to my lawyer, and he'll be in touch with yours. Eleanor had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. She didn't cry. She simply nodded. I see. Her lack of reaction seemed to bother him. He expected a scene. I'll be generous, of course, he said, a lie tasting like ash in his own mouth. He gave her a look that was either pity or contempt. He was gone the next day. 2 days later, David Cho received the official divorce petition from Marco Torres, and it was exactly as the email had promised. On page 4 was the bombshell clause. Furthermore, petitioner has serious reasons to believe he is not the biological father of the 2 children born during the marriage, and will be moving the court to compel a paternity test to resolve this matter. The news, when it inevitably leaked to the press, was a Category 5 hurricane. Headlines screamed, "Tech mogul's divorce bombshell." Who's the daddy? Eleanor became an instant pariah. Mothers at her children's private school turned their backs on her. The paparazzi photographed her looking haggard. On social media, trolls were ruthless. Mark and Brittany, meanwhile, were photographed looking somber and united, a portrait of 2 people bravely facing a devastating betrayal. Through it all, Eleanor remained silent. She became a recluse in her own home. The pressure is immense, Eleanor, David told her on the phone. They're painting a narrative, and right now we're letting them. Let them, Eleanor replied, her voice quiet. Let them build the pedestal as high as they want. It will make the fall so much more spectacular. The day before the first court hearing, a secure, encrypted email arrived from the DNA lab. David opened it with Eleanor on a video call. It was a simple PDF document, a series of graphs and numbers, but at the bottom was the summary. Probability of match: Mark Thompson and Leo Thompson, 99.999%. Probability of match: Mark Thompson and Sophia Thompson, 99.99%. Eleanor closed her eyes. A single, hot tear finally escaped and traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of vindication. We have it, David said, his voice filled with grim satisfaction. The silver bullet. Good, Eleanor said, opening her eyes. They were clear and cold as a winter sky. Now we just let him load the gun and point it at his own head. If Eleanor's master plan for vindication left you speechless, be sure to like this video to show your support. The weeks leading up to the preliminary hearing were a masterclass in psychological warfare orchestrated by Mark and his lawyer, Marco Torres. Torre, a man with a reptilian smile and a reputation for burning the earth of his legal adversaries, launched a full-scale media assault. Carefully selected sources close to the couple began to leak stories to gossip columns and tech blogs. One story suggested Eleanor had been having a long-running affair with a bohemian art dealer from her past. Another hinted at her erratic behavior and irresponsible spending. They were building a case in the court of public opinion, meticulously crafting an image of Eleanor as an unstable, untrustworthy woman, perfectly capable of deceiving her husband for 15 years. Eleanor weathered the storm from inside the walls of the Atherton mansion. She felt like a prisoner, the whispers and headlines forming invisible bars around her. The hardest part was shielding the children. Leo, at 12, was old enough to feel the tension. He saw the paparazzi lurking at the end of their long driveway and asked questions Eleanor couldn't answer. "Mom, why are those people always taking pictures?" he asked one night, his voice small. Eleanor hugged him tight. "Daddy and I are having some grown-up disagreements, sweetheart. But we both love you and Sophia more than anything in the world. That will never, ever change." It was a half-truth, but it was the only one she could give. Meanwhile, David Cho was playing a very different game. While Marco Torre was busy talking to reporters, David was buried in paperwork, filing motion after motion for financial disclosure. He requested every bank statement, every email, every contract related to Mark's labyrinthine corporate structure. Torre's office responded with a deluge of paper, thousands of pages of irrelevant documents, a classic hide-the-needle-in-a-haystack tactic. But David had hired a team of forensic accountants, telling them to look for the specific shell corporations mentioned in the Project Nightingale email. "He thinks he's smarter than everyone," David told Eleanor during one of their late-night calls. "Men like Mark believe the rules are for other people. They get sloppy. He's moved millions, but he's left a trail. We just have to find it." The day of the pre-trial hearing was a formality, but a crucial one. It was where Mark's team would formally present their motion to compel the paternity test. They met in Judge Valencia's chambers, a room that felt more like a library. Mark was there, exuding a grim confidence. Marco Torre did all the talking, his voice soft and reasonable, as he laid out his unfortunate but necessary request. "Your Honor," Torre began, "my client did not come to this decision lightly. It is with great sorrow he must face the possibility of a profound deception. For the sake of his own peace of mind, and for the future well-being and clarity of the children, we believe a paternity test is the only way forward on a foundation of truth." Judge Valencia, a woman in her late 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, listened without expression. She looked to David and Eleanor. "Mr. Cho, your response?" David stood up. "Your Honor, my client finds this accusation to be baseless, insulting, and deeply malicious. It is a transparent attempt to damage her reputation and gain an advantage in these proceedings. It is character assassination, plain and simple." Torre smirked. "If the accusation is baseless, then your client should have no objection to a simple test to clear her name. Her resistance only feeds my client's concerns." This was the turning point. David had coached her for this. She paused, as if considering her options. "My client does not resist the truth, Mr. Torres. She is disgusted by the lie." She turned to the judge. "To put an end to this vile and public speculation, and to protect her children from further uncertainty, she will consent. Let the court order the test. Let us have the truth once and for all." Mark's eyes gleamed with triumph. He had won. He had forced her hand. She had agreed to precisely the thing that, in his mind, would expose and ruin her. He gave Eleanor a look of cold pity. Judge Valencia nodded curtly. Very well. The court orders a medically certified DNA test for Mr. Thompson and the two minors, Leo and Sophia Thompson. Samples will be collected by a court-appointed lab. The results will be delivered directly to this court, sealed to be opened at the next hearing. The trap was now officially set, baited, and sanctioned by the legal system itself. In the days that followed, the court-ordered sample collection took place. A nurse from the appointed lab went to Eleanor's home to take cheek swabs from the children. Another met Mark at his downtown office. It was all very clinical and sterile. For Mark, it was the final nail in Eleanor's coffin. He was so certain of his victory, so wrapped up in his narrative of her betrayal, that he didn't even entertain the possibility that he was wrong. His ego wouldn't allow it. Behind the scenes, David's team of forensic accountants finally found gold. Following the breadcrumbs of a single bank transfer, they unraveled a web of accounts stretching from the Cayman Islands to Switzerland. They found Nightingale investments, just as the email had described. They documented over $70 million in marital assets, cash, stock, property deeds, that had been systematically and illegally siphoned into these accounts in the 6 months before Mark filed for divorce. It was a clear case of criminal fraud, but David found something else, something even more incriminating. While investigating the transfers, he noticed a recurring payment, a monthly transfer from one of the offshore accounts to a private trust. The beneficiary of the trust? Brittany Hayes. This wasn't just an affair. It was a financial arrangement. Mark wasn't just cheating on his wife. He was paying his mistress with the very marital funds he was hiding from Eleanor. This changes everything, David said, showing Eleanor the bank traces. She's not just the other woman. She's a paid co-conspirator. She knew about the hidden assets. She was profiting from them. She's just as guilty as he is. What would you do if you discovered a betrayal like this? Share your thoughts in the comments. The morning of the hearing arrived, shrouded in a dense coastal fog that seemed to muffle the entire city. Eleanor chose her armor carefully, the same simple navy blue dress. It was her uniform of quiet resolve. As she drove to the courthouse with David, she felt an odd sense of calm. The fear and anxiety that had plagued her for months had burned away, leaving only a cold, hard clarity. They entered courtroom 4B to a scene of barely controlled chaos. The gallery was packed. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Mark and Brittany arrived last. They were a vision of power and victory. They took their seats, Mark giving a curt nod to his lawyer and completely ignoring Eleanor. To him, she was already a ghost, a footnote in his triumphant new life. "All rise," the bailiff called out, as Judge Evelyn Valencia swept into the room. She sat down, her face an impassive mask, and surveyed the room over her glasses. The ambient noise died instantly. "We are here today to continue the divorce proceedings of Thompson v. Thompson," Judge Valencia began, her voice crisp and authoritative. "The primary item of business today is to unseal and announce the results of the court-ordered paternity test. Mr. Torre, as this was your motion, I assume you are eager to proceed." "We are, Your Honor," Marco Torre said, standing up. He cast a theatrical look of sympathy toward his client. "Mr. Thompson is prepared to face the truth, however painful it may be." Eleanor could feel the smug energy of Mark radiating from across the aisle. He leaned forward slightly in his chair, like a sprinter on the starting blocks, waiting for the gun that would signal his victory. Judge Valencia picked up a large, sealed manila envelope from her desk. The seal of the court-appointed lab was visible in crimson wax. With a small, sharp letter opener, she slid it open. The sound was unnaturally loud in the silent room. She slid out a single sheet of paper and unfolded it. She read it to herself first, her eyes scanning the page. For a fleeting second, her impassive facade seemed to crack. A flash of something. Disgust? Surprise? Crossed her features before being repressed. She looked up, her gaze moving from the paper directly to Mark Thompson. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice like cracking ice. "The court has received the official notarized DNA analysis. According to the results, the probability of you, Mark Thompson, being the biological father of the boy, Leo Thompson, is 99.99%. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Mark's smile didn't just waver, it shattered. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, slack-jawed mask of disbelief. He looked at the judge as if she had just started speaking a foreign language. Judge Valencia wasn't finished. "Furthermore, the probability of you, Mark Thompson, being the biological father of the girl, Sophia Thompson, is 99.99%. She laid the paper flat on her desk. "Let the record show that the paternity of the children is, by your own motion, Mr. Thompson, established beyond all scientific doubt. You are their father." The silence that followed was deafening. Mark spun his head to look at Marco Torre, his eyes wide with panic and fury. Torre looked just as stunned, his mouth slightly agape. Brittany's hand, which had been on Mark's back, was withdrawn as if she'd touched a hot stove. Her face was a canvas of pure shock. This was the first blow. But Eleanor and David knew it was just the prelude. Before Torre could recover and stammer a response, David Cho stood up. "Your Honor," he said, his voice quiet, but resonating in every corner of the room. Judge Valencia turned her piercing gaze on him. "Mr. Cho, given that Mr. Thompson's central claim, a claim he and his lawyer have publicly and viciously prosecuted, has now been proven to be a categorical and malicious falsehood, we have several matters we wish to bring to the court's attention." Torre finally found his voice. "Objection! This is not on the docket." "Overruled," Judge Valencia snapped, her eyes narrowing at Torre. "You opened this door, counsel. You put Mrs. Thompson's character and morality on public trial based on a lie. I am inclined to hear what Mr. Cho has to say. Proceed." David nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor. Over the last several months, my client has been the subject of a ruthless smear campaign, all predicated on the lie that has just been exposed. But Mr. Thompson's deception runs far deeper than character assassination. He has also engaged in a systematic and illegal campaign to defraud my client of her rightful share of the marital estate." He walked to the clerk and handed over a thick binder. "Your Honor, this is a full forensic accounting report. It details numerous offshore shell corporations, with names like Nightingale Investments, and documents the illegal transfer of over $70 million in marital assets into these untraceable accounts in the 6 months before Mir Thompson filed for divorce. It was a more powerful bombshell than the first. Reporters were writing so fast their pens seemed to smoke. Mark looked as though he had been physically struck. He was no longer a predator. He was prey caught in a spotlight, and he was starting to look for a route of escape. "This is an outrage," Torre bellowed, but his protest lacked conviction. He looked terrified. "It is an outrage, Mr. Torre," Judge Valencia said coolly, flipping through the first few pages of the binder David had given her. "It appears to be a prima facie case of fraud and perjury, given the financial disclosures Mr. Thompson has already filed with this court." She looked back at Mark, her eyes filled with undisguised contempt. "Mr. Thompson, you are in a catastrophic amount of legal trouble." But David Cho wasn't finished. He held up a hand for quiet. "And finally, Your Honor," he said, his voice dropping slightly, drawing everyone in. "This entire painful charade, the false accusations, the public humiliation of my client, The attempt to disown his own children was not a spontaneous act by a misguided man. It was a premeditated conspiracy. He turned his body slightly to include not just Mark, but Brittany in his line of sight. A conspiracy not just between Mr. Thompson and his legal team, but one that actively involved his mistress, Ms. Brittany Hayes. Brittany, who had been shrinking in her seat, now looked up, her eyes wide with terror. "Objection, Your Honor! He is baselessly attacking a civilian in this courtroom!" Torre shouted. "Is it baseless, Mr. Cho?" Judge Valencia asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "No, Your Honor," David replied. He pulled out another document. "This is a notarized affidavit from Dr. Marco Vicente." At the mention of the name, all the color drained from Brittany's face. She looked at Mark, a desperate, pleading look in her eyes. But Mark wasn't looking at her. He was looking at David Cho with pure, unadulterated hatred. "Dr. Vicente," David continued, "was Ms. Hayes' fiancé until she abruptly broke off their engagement 18 months ago to begin her affair with the married Mr. Thompson. In his affidavit, Dr. Vicente testifies under penalty of perjury that Ms. Hayes described the entire plan to him. A plan where she and Mr. Thompson would fabricate a narrative of spousal infidelity, which would allow Mr. Thompson to file for divorce, hide his assets, and challenge paternity to get full custody and leave his wife with nothing. She described it to her fiancé as their perfect plan." David let the words hang in the air. The second, and most powerful, detonation. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged her gavel, but it was useless against the tide of shock and indignation. Brittany Hayes broke. Her carefully constructed facade of sophisticated calm crumbled into dust. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, and pointed a shaking finger at Mark. You told me it would work!" she shrieked, her voice shrill with panic. "You told me she would break! You told me your lawyers had it all handled! You promised me everything!" Mark looked at her, his face a mask of utter contempt. "Shut up, you fool!" he hissed. But it was too late. Her public outburst was a confession. She had just admitted to the entire conspiracy in open court. Judge Valencia brought her gavel down. 3 loud, deafening thuds. "Silence!" she roared, her voice ringing with authority. The room finally went quiet. She pointed a finger at Brittany. "Ms. Hayes, you will sit down and not say another word, or I will have you removed and held for contempt." She then fixed her icy gaze on Mark Thompson. "Mr. Thompson, your actions in this room, and leading up to them, are the most reprehensible I have seen in my 15 years on this bench. You have committed perjury. You have committed fraud. You have maliciously attempted to defraud your wife and traumatize your own children for financial gain. You have abused the justice system and made a mockery of this court." She leaned forward. "This divorce proceeding is now the least of your problems. I am referring this entire case, the financial fraud, the perjury, the conspiracy, to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal investigation." She looked at the court officer. "Mr. Cho's binders of evidence are to be sealed and delivered to the district attorney by the end of the day." She looked at Marco Torre. "And you, counsel, are dangerously close to being implicated in this conspiracy. I advise you to retain your own lawyer." Finally, her gaze softened for a moment as she looked at Eleanor. It was a look of profound respect. Eleanor met her gaze and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She hadn't said a word. She hadn't needed to. Mark Thompson, the billionaire titan, the master of the universe, sat slumped in his chair, utterly broken. His smile was gone, replaced by the vacant, terrified stare of a man whose world had just been totally and completely erased by a truth he had been too arrogant to even consider. The fallout from the courtroom detonation was swift and brutal. The story wasn't just news. It was a global phenomenon. Headlines screamed, "Billionaire's divorce plot implodes. Fraud, perjury, and a fake paternity scandal." The narrative Mark and Torre had so carefully built was shattered, and the shrapnel destroyed their reputations. Mark Thompson was arrested 2 days later. The image of the industry titan in handcuffs, his face pale and haggard, being led into a police car, became the defining photo of his fall. The board of directors at Quantum Leap called an emergency meeting and summarily fired him as CEO, issuing a public statement denouncing his deplorable personal conduct. The company's stock plunged, wiping out billions in value. The king god of Silicon Valley had been dethroned. Marco Torre, facing disbarment and a possible indictment as a co-conspirator, immediately cut a deal with the district attorney's office, agreeing to testify against his former client in exchange for immunity. Brittany Hayes disappeared, fired from her job, and facing her own legal woes, she became a ghost. Her social media was deleted. Her apartment was emptied. The crimson and cream dresses were replaced by the harsh glare of public infamy. The life she had conspired to steal had become a nightmare she couldn't escape. For Eleanor, the victory was quiet, but total. With Mark's assets unfrozen and his fraud exposed, the divorce settlement was swift and staggering. She was awarded 60% of the marital estate, a sum that amounted to hundreds of millions of dollars. She was granted full legal and physical custody of Leo and Sophia, with Mark's visitation rights supervised and contingent on an extensive psychological evaluation. She also won ownership of the Atherton mansion, but Eleanor didn't want the mansion. It was a gilded cage filled with the ghosts of lies. The first thing she did was put it on the market. 6 months later, the dust had begun to settle. The world had moved on to its next scandal, and Mark Thompson's name was now a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. He was out on bail, awaiting a criminal trial he was almost certain to lose. Eleanor and her children lived in a beautiful, light-filled home in Marin County, far from the bustle of Silicon Valley. It was smaller than the Atherton mansion, but it felt infinitely bigger. It was a home, not a showroom. It had a sprawling garden where Sophia planted sunflowers, and a music room where Leo was learning to play the guitar. The paparazzi were gone. The whispers had faded. Their lives were, blessedly, wonderfully normal. Eleanor had rediscovered the woman she was before she became Mrs. Mark Thompson. She had started a small private art consultancy firm, advising collectors and authenticating pieces, the very same skills she had used to deconstruct her husband's web of lies. She found joy in the work and in using her mind and passion again. One autumn afternoon, she sat on her back porch, a cup of tea warming her hands, watching her children play on the lawn. They were laughing, a sound that was pure and unburdened. Leo looked up and saw her, giving her a wide, easy smile. It was a genuine smile, full of love and security. It was everything Mark's smile had never been. David Cho came to visit, bringing some final paperwork to sign. They sat together on the porch, a comfortable silence between them. "You know," David said, looking out at the yard, "I've handled hundreds of divorce cases. Most of them end with bitterness and scorched earth. I've never seen one end with this." "With what?" Eleanor asked. "With peace," he said. "He set out to destroy you, Eleanor. Instead, you found yourself." Eleanor considered his words. He was right. In the fire of Mark's betrayal, she had been forged into someone stronger, more resilient, and more fiercely protective of her own happiness than she had ever known she could be. She had lost a husband and a life she thought she wanted, but she had gained herself and a future that was entirely her own. A breeze whispered through the trees, bringing the scent of salt from the river and the sound of her children's laughter. She took a deep breath, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt completely and utterly free. The war was over, and she had won. Not by fighting with his weapons of cruelty and deceit, but with her own intelligence, patience, and the undeniable power of truth. Eleanor's story is a powerful reminder that truth is the weapon that never fails. It shows that integrity and strength aren't about how loud you can shout, but how patiently you can plan, and how bravely you can stand in your own conviction, even when the world is against you. Mark Thompson walked into that courtroom believing his money and power made him invincible. He forgot that the most powerful forces on earth, a mother's love, and the simple, elegant truth, cannot be bought, bullied, or beaten. If this story of justice and vindication moved you, please like the video to show your support. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that strength comes in many forms, and the truth will always come to light. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of deception, survival, and ultimate triumph.